Welcome to Coffee Time with Abcadeas. I am your host, Abcadeas, and this is the show where I hope and pray that the audio actually works this time. Because I just filmed the whole 40 minutes to have the audio be very out of sync and very delayed. But this is the show where you're going to see me take a sip or two out of this coffee, especially now. But more or less, I'm just here to rant about anything and everything that interests me. So first, take a sip. But first off, I guess an apology, maybe a bit of you're welcome for not posting a video yesterday. I had quite a few things going on, quite a few technical issues, apparently that have been compounded today, but I thought they were all resolved. Apparently I have more technical issues to address, but we can address those after this video and just hope to no end that this one turns out okay. But today's video that I wanted to do yesterday, a bit of a new segment, kind of series, I guess, in a sense, where I just want to respond to some comments that I have building up that I maybe responded to a bit. I didn't respond to as thoroughly as I feel is necessary, or that I just feel are interesting, and that I want to have a good little jovial laugh at. So, the first comments I want to go over are the comments left under my video talking on Daniel Smith and the 15-minute city issue happening in Edmonton. Two separate issues, by the way. 15-minute city proposed plan by our mayor, Amarjeet Sohi. I don't think there's a T at the end of that. But basically just a plan to look at every neighborhood and make sure that within each neighborhood are the necessary services that people need, like a Medi-Center, an affordable grocery retailer, a dentist, all these different kinds of services, instead of having areas of the city where within a 15-minute walk you have 50 dentists, and then if you live on the other side of the city, you have to walk an hour to a dentist, right? There's a better way to kind of plan that out. And out of the things that municipal government would be responsible for, city planning would definitely be on the top of the list. So, what some people have extrapolated this into is that because this is being done for multiple reasons, but one of them being in an effort to reduce overall emissions, having people in the city needing to travel less to get to the things they need to get to every day, it's been extrapolated to mean that there are going to be walls and gates erected and passport systems, and if you want to travel to any other part of the city, you're going to have to get your passport stamped, and if you've spent more than 10% of your time outside of your district in the city, that they're going to take you out and execute you by firing squad or something, right? I'm being a slightly hyperbolic at the end there, but that is literally the thoughts I've heard from people that are close to me that believe that this is a real issue. Okay. And then Daniel Smith made some very inflammatory comments, basically saying that Europeans and indigenous people work together, hand in hand, to overcome, to tame an unforgiving frontier. I addressed why that was absolutely nonsense in my video, but I kind of wanted to look at a few of the comments that were left that more or less actually just prove the exact point I was making in the video. Right here, Mr. Cowboys fan, a true Albertan patriot, supporting a Texan American football team in the American National Football League. Alberta supports Daniel Smith. Leftist ideology is evil and disgusting. 15-minute cities will never be tolerated. We will not allow the left to separate us again. Okay, I'm probably being a little too aggressive, a bit too animated with that, but people are definitely convinced 15-minute cities are the liberals implementing communism and will have the whole country locked down once it's implemented in every city across the country. Despite the fact that the actual Charter of Rights in Canada ingrains the freedom of movement. Yes, this is the freedom to move between provinces, but I'm all but certain any Supreme Court judge in Canada would extrapolate that to mean movement in general, and that restricting your movement within a city wouldn't fly. It wouldn't be tolerated. There are private gated communities. There's private corporate property that you're not allowed to travel onto at certain times. But other than that, I don't think anything is going to be restricted. If they were going to erect walls and gates and implement a intercity passport system, they would have to have some kind of formal plan, or there would be some sign of them actually doing that, right? Like, that's not just going to be an overnight 24-hour endeavor. That's going to be quite a bit of prep work. And if they're not going to erect walls and gates, how do you think they would even try to make it work, right? What, they're going to put cops on every single fucking street, checking your license and your address to make sure you're not traveling outside of your district for too long? Like, none of this makes any sense. It doesn't. Like, when you think about it, the amount of resources and the lack of funding that police departments already have. Don't get me wrong, I'm all for defunding the police and looking at community programs, but when you look at police unions and the way they have to handle issues, like especially the Edmonton Police Service, in terms of what they are trying to accomplish, they are already understaffed because the city doesn't want to give them enough money. So you really think the city wants to expand that department 20-fold so they could monitor every single street and every single intersection in the city because they want to control us? I'm sorry, I should be more reasonable with these kinds of people, but it's like, I don't get how any rational human could think these things. But it kind of all gets explained once he goes on to his retort. Read the story of the Tower of Babel in the Bible. So I genuinely engaged him, this person here. You can see, oh, I accidentally clicked on his profile. And I'm going to just say safely it's a him with all the, I shouldn't gender, but, you know. Oh no. Oh no. I lost newest first. There we go. Here we go. So yeah, I gave him a pretty legitimate reply. Feel free to go to the comment section yourself and read it. But this person, this man, this boy, commenting on a goddamn 41-minute video, right? Try to keep your reply short and to the point. It's not natural for human beings to operate within large institutions controlled by a few psychopaths. I explicitly went over this in my comment, by the way. But the Tower of Babel will always fall. We need to use this 2,000-year-old book to tell us how to do everything. And you, sir, that is trying to get into a nuanced conversation about how we should run a country. Oh, you need to keep that short. You should just read a story in the Bible. Just read a story in the Bible. This will teach us everything we need to know. Just read the Bible. Just read the Bible. Okay, so what does the Bible say about what we should do with someone with multiple traffic infractions? Someone that has ran several stop signs and red lights? What does the Bible say about domestic custody issues where both parents seem to be unfit, but the adoption system is a significantly worse alternative? What does the Bible say about police brutality that is not being acknowledged by any police officers anywhere, even the good ones? What does the Bible say to do about that? I'm sure there's some some fable you could give me, some story you could give me that if I thought really hard and forgot anything about modern human civilization whatsoever, and I just focused on the one little point it was making, I'm sure I could extract that one point and base my entire analysis on that one point. But I'm not going to do that because it's absolutely ridiculous. I look at historical evidence. I look at the actual history of the issue, the way people are reacting to it currently, the people that it affects, the side effects that it has, and the actual tangible evidence around that. The verifiable things, the real living people I can talk to, the real live stories I can watch with my eyes. I rely on that. And relying on the Bible is why the Europeans did all that fucked up shit to indigenous people in the first place. That's what enabled them to go on the whole white man burden trope that they're here to save indigenous people, that without indigenous people, or without the Europeans, indigenous people would just be all dead by now. They wouldn't have survived, or they would all be inbred savages, and they wouldn't be able to have modern civilization. And I shit you not, that is the next frickin' comment I'm gonna go over. Disinfo, out here living up to their username. Let me educate you. Indigenous people claim that settlers colonized them. Without settlers, they would still be living in tents. However, they always fail to mention that indigenous also colonized the original Paleo-Eskimos, people that were here before them. Okay. So, disinfo. I'm going to give you a couple pointers if you're going to patronize someone and educate them. You should probably know how to spell the thing you're trying to educate them on. Like paleo. You spelled that wrong. And you used where instead of were. And that sentence is just kind of a garbled freaking mess. And just kind of proves the point that you don't have the right to patronize anybody about anything. But, grammar aside, disinfo, living up to the username, asserts that the Paleo-Eskimo people were colonized. Okay. So, I'll admit, I didn't know the Paleo-Eskimo people. I didn't know very much about them. I assumed, given the term Paleo and given the term Eskimo, the former being a term usually to refer to prehistoric or ancient cultures, societies, or species. Eskimo being a somewhat derogatory term used in Canada to refer to the indigenous cultures that occupied the northern part of this country in the Arctic Circle. I assume, putting those two words together, that means a group of indigenous people that occupied the northern lands quite some time ago. And turns out, yes, that is correct. They first are known to be in the area around 2500 BCE, or that's when they can first be traced back to, and eventually with their demise around 1500 CE, once they evolved, per se, into the Dorset culture. So we do a bit more research into the Dorset culture. And we find out 1500 CE, so definitely wasn't the Europeans that wiped them out. Columbus was just barely discovering the Caribbean at this point. We were definitely not charting the northern Canadian Arctic. But, despite my best efforts, I can't find one archaeologist, one suggestion that these people were wiped out by other indigenous cultures. There is a study from the scientific journal here. This New York Times article that I've highlighted kind of summarizes the study, but seems to be the scientific consensus that the Dorset culture did not vanish through assimilation. Mainly their issue was isolation, because they didn't want to interbreed or integrate with other indigenous cultures that cause them to inbreed rampantly. And I'm sure the people making these kind of comments are very well aware firsthand of the consequences of inbreeding. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. But as a result, people are more prone to disease, genetic birth defects. Generally, their survival as a culture, as a whole, if the entire culture is inbreeding, like with the Egyptian pharaohs, it leads to a lot of problems. Like with European royalty, leads to a lot of problems. But on top of that, because they were living in the Arctic, as the climate was changing, as the climate has changed for hundreds, thousands of years, even a slight shift in temperature can devastate marine life, changing entire food sources, causing them to have to migrate either to different islands or to find substitute food sources. And furthermore, this study concluded that there are no samples of Dorset DNA in the modern Inuit. So, while it isn't necessary during colonization that there will be some interbreeding between tribes, cultures, factions, whatever, generally, especially throughout history of mankind, when a culture or a civilization conquers another culture, they take some of their women and make children with them. Very horrific, very dark part of maybe not just human existence, but imperialist existence, perhaps. But that's a more philosophical conversation that I want to get into. But if the Dorset people had been colonized, it's very, very unlikely that every single one of them would have been completely wiped off the face of the earth, and not a single female would have been bred with, and that there wouldn't be a single piece of DNA. And to my knowledge, there hasn't been any trace of Dorset DNA in any of the modern Inuit. And like this article and like this study says, flat out, they don't believe that it was colonization from another indigenous tribe that caused these people to die out. But let's throw that all out the window. Let's say disinfo, you are correct. The Inuit colonized, I would say conquered in that case, but regardless. But they were the cause of the disappearance of the Dorset people, the Paleo-Eskimo people. I'm assuming you would mean Dorset people because the Paleo-Eskimo is a little too far back. I'm sure you're not talking about 4,000-year-old indigenous culture. I'm sure you're not going that far back. Say even if their extinction was caused by another indigenous tribe. So in your mind, that happening some 500 years ago justifies Europeans starting off by slaughtering them, and then eventually pitting them against each other, conducting biological warfare against them, infecting them with smallpox, and then abducting their children, raping, torturing, murdering a lot of those children. And the ones that did survive were completely erased of any sort of their culture, their cultural identity, spirituality, language. And then as that was still going on, our police force just saw fit to abduct adult-aged indigenous people and took them out into the wilderness and just let them freeze to death. And on top of that, all of our police forces are turning a blind eye to the several hundreds, if not thousands, of missing and murdered indigenous women that continue to prop up under very suspicious circumstances, some of which with the police seeming to have some kind of involvement and still turning a blind eye. Or we could get into child protective services and how in situations where they wouldn't hesitate to take a child away from an indigenous parent, they would do everything they can to keep a child in the same situation in a white household to keep them with their family. This is very anecdotal. Don't get me wrong, I don't have any statistical kind of evidence I can go over. But I can tell you the amount of white children I knew that were kept with their parents who were doing very horrific things to them. I can't even count that on one hand. And the amount of times that I've heard of children being ripped from indigenous families, and that I've talked to people that have either been proxy to that or have been involved in that in some way, or watching and reading stories of people that have been through this, it seems like Child Protective Services are a lot more quickly to act and a lot more quick to remove a child from an indigenous household. So all that still going on to this day, not even talking about discrimination in public, amongst public people like yourself, disinfo against indigenous people, not even involving that, but you think all that is justified because some, 5% of the indigenous population, maybe 10%, I'm pretty sure that's a little too high, but 10% of the indigenous population, the Inuit, killed off the Dorset people? Why didn't you mention the indigenous tribes, I believe it was the Mi'kmaq, that were brought to the island of Newfoundland to kill off the Beothuk, on top of the Europeans' efforts to directly kill off the Beothuk, use biological warfare, all that great stuff? How come that's not involved too? Doesn't that one tribe killing off another tribe, doesn't that justify everything that Europeans have done to indigenous people? Huh? No? I don't even know where to start with people like this. I think it's completely asinine, and they're not even here to engage in any kind of way. They're just here to assert their preconceived biases. They're not here to listen to any length. Like Cowboy fan said, keep your replies short. When we're talking about hundreds of years of history and how to run our nations going into the future, you should be able to break it down into a one-sentence platitude. I'm sorry I can't do that. I guess I won't be a liberal bourgeois politician that you get to vote for every 4 years and pray that they do the right thing. Sorry, the greatest part about this is this interaction with Disinfo finished with, "You obviously nothing about the Paleo-Eskimos," spelt it wrong again. "History you claim to know. Glad I could help." Okay, so I never once claimed in this interaction that I knew anything about Paleo-Eskimos. In fact, I admitted in the earlier part of this video that before this interaction, I had no idea what Paleo-Eskimos were. I had a natural assumption, but I didn't know. Yeah, again, you need to spell check your comments, maybe read them over after you comment and fill in the missing words, but the fact that you say, "I know nothing," that after some cursory research, I can see that there is nothing even approaching an academic consensus that these people were wiped out by another indigenous tribe. And you're telling me I don't know. On to the next comment. A little bit of backstory on this one. So before I started making my solo YouTube content, I was making some TikTok content, quote unquote. Again, just kind of popping open my camera, going over whatever I wanted to talk about at the time. But I had posted some clips from Alexander Mercouris, him talking on topics that I thought weren't really acknowledged in Western media at all, and with the extremely liberal bias of TikTok itself, it's definitely stuff that never gets mentioned on there. So, first off was a video basically talking about the West preparing negotiations with Russia that were absolutely implacable to the Russians. That the West, and Tony Blinken, would have had to know that the Russians wouldn't have accepted those terms as the basis for negotiations whatsoever. So it was kind of a farcical effort, more or less to appease the European allies of America that are starting to get some cold feet. Olaf Scholz, Emmanuel Macron, these kinds, Viktor Orban even, perhaps in there. And then So this individual, Enigma, commented on that video. Second video Enigma commented on was a video of Alexander Makuris just reading out and discussing the IMF report, the International Monetary Fund report, a pretty globally recognized and globally accepted kind of authority on international and national economies, right? See why that's relevant in a minute. But I realize this person is trying to engage with me, and I wouldn't even have enough time to engage these topics properly in the breadth of a TikTok video, even going up to 3 minutes. So I direct messaged them, personal message, whatever it's called on TikTok, and I said, here you go. Here's my email. Why don't you email me, and we can hash this out with sources, and we can go point by point and actually break this down and get into a conversation about this. Not only did I never get an email, this person's comments just mysteriously disappeared, and then I couldn't find their profile anymore. So they had blocked me. But again, these people don't really want to have an actual conversation, a rational conversation. They just want to say their piece, and like a pigeon playing chess. They just want to knock over the chessboard and chirp and flap their wings and act like they won, right? So, I mean, I don't mind them doing that at all. Like, I'm fully aware that most of these people will never see this video, and even if they do see this video, I doubt they can get through enough of it to actually get to their comment or the actual criticism I'm making of their comment. But, nevertheless, I think it makes absolutely great content for me. So it's really just free content, right? Free engagement. If I can encourage people to leave comments, it'll help my video get circulated a bit more. But without further ado, let's start off with Enigma's first comment. And scooch this. Cancel. We want to scooch this over. I was in the wrong window there. Scooch that over like that. There you go. So Enigma comes at me with, you are either blind or willfully ignorant if you don't know the Russian army have been declared a terrorist organization. And just for context, this is the person's TikTok profile. They are, as you can see, a fierce defender of human rights. Right? That's why they are here in my TikTok comment section coming at me. All right. So let's start off. In fact, yes, Russia has been declared a state sponsor of terrorism. They have. Not a terrorist organization, but I can see how you could try and equate the two. You would absolutely be incorrect, but for general public dialogue, it kind of makes the same point. But was it the UN? Any kind of international body where countries come together and have an unbiased discussion and make these kind of declarations? Or was it the European Parliament? The European Parliament, that I would argue are all state sponsors or actual terrorists. We'll get into that in a minute. But yes, it was the European Union, not the UN or any kind of international body, that declared Russia a state sponsor of terror. So, if you want to get a brief overview of some of the, just a small grain of the terrorism that the Europeans have enacted across the world, feel free to rewind this video to the beginning, or feel free to watch my previous video. Or feel free to research any of the history of Africa, or any of the history of South America, or North America. Lots there. But if you want some more recent examples, we can't hold the people of today responsible for the sins of their fathers, right? The sins of their ancestors. So we can talk about the Afghanistan war, that caused death and suffering of tens and thousands of people, far after the Soviets, you can say invaded, but came to the help of the socialist Afghani government that asked for them to come. That is long over, and we're talking early 2000s, right? You had the UK and Germany both involved there, sending troops, men, material, missiles, all that good stuff. You had the Iraq War. The UK and Spain were involved in that, ended up destroying that entire country and killing tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of innocent civilians. You have the intervention in Libya. Several EU member states helped overthrow Gaddafi, which has now resulted in that country basically being an open-air slave market, and significantly worse than anything it was under Gaddafi, all because Gaddafi wanted to create a Pan-African Union and an African currency that could have actually helped steer Africa out of the influence of... Let me check my notes. Oh, yeah, the Europeans. Right? That's why you see countries like Mali and Burkina Faso making such distinctive moves to distance themselves from French colonialism. I believe it was the Barbados or Bahamas removed the British monarchy as their head of state. That's why you see all these countries that were colonized that had European countries bring in their military to use force and fear to control for a political agenda. A political gain, you could say, came into these countries, terrorized the people, did violent acts to instill fear in them. Huh. I wonder if there's a word for that. Huh. I'm not even done, by the way. You have the European involvement in the war in Somalia that the US is still actively bombing. You have the EU's involvement in Bosnia and Herzegovina throughout the early 90s. And once you get to the later 90s, you have the bombing campaign over Yugoslavia, which is now Serbia and Kosovo. All of these are basically domestic conflicts that the Europeans just wanted to get involved in to whatever ends they had, whatever motivation they had, but resulted in the deaths of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. And you're telling me I should listen to these people when they call someone else a terrorist? It's kind of a bit of a pot and kettle situation, isn't it? Pot calling the kettle black, per se. Fun fact, by the way, doing some kind of cursory research trying to put that list together of actions, offensive military actions that the European powers have taken. Google only wanted to give me articles about how things in those countries are better now, or how the European intervention actually worked out. It didn't want to give me any kind of lists, or it didn't want to specify the actual military actions taken. It was near impossible. I tried Russian Yandex search engine, and I was able to find several research papers from academics all across the world, mind you, not just in Russia, academics in India, in Singapore, in South Africa, in America, in Canada, right? I found tons of those going over the information I wanted to find, but for some reason, typing the exact same search request into Google didn't yield me the same results. Could that maybe be because we try to control the narrative in the West, so people are under this weird impression that we are the all-good world police out to save humankind, and every other country is just an evil, tyrannical, Hitler-like dictator that wants to genocide everything that it sees? Could be. Could be. I mean, I'm going to post links to a couple things. Mainly a couple of the reports, a couple of the research documents I found, all the websites I've shown. I can't, unfortunately. I'll maybe try and post a link to the TikTok that these comments were on, but I may not have the time to today. But I just wanted to go over Enigma's next comment. That this is the one left on the video about the IMF report. You are just a kid. Pasty-faced fool. Your mind is filled with conspiracy theories and hate. If you side with Russia, that stain sticks to you. So this is why I needed to give the context. I hadn't made any of my solo content yet. I still don't really advocate on the side of Russia per se. That's a different conversation, but trying to tell me my mind is filled with crazy conspiracy theories. Unlike the conspiracy theories that having a grocery store and a Medi Center within a 15-minute walk to me will result in Orwellian-style neighborhood lockdowns, gated communities, and restricted travel. All that aside, the clip he was commenting on was Alexander Makuris reading this report from, we gotta go over here and move this over for y'all so you can see, but from the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. He was just reading out these numbers. What the International Monetary Fund was saying. That's conspiracy. It's hard for me to believe that there's actual real people on the other sides of these accounts. It has to be just like an AI robot coming up with these results, or it has to be like a genuine US intelligence psyop where they're just trying to sow hate and division. But I think it makes great content. It gives me a good chance to dive into topics that I would otherwise have to come up with an excuse and a narrative to dive into. But attacking these comments head on, I think, does a really great job and gives me a lot of material to go on. It's a bit more comedic and entertaining, maybe. But I figured I'd round it out with this gem of a comment that was left under Entitled Millennials video I did with them. But in direct reference to me, let's scooch this over. You are a seditious traitor to America, an enemy of the country, and an all-around douchebag. Oh. First thing I got to say to that, thank you. I think that is some of the highest praise I have received in a while. And number two, I'm a Canadian living in Canada. Have a gooder.